The conference room on the 42nd floor smelled like leather and ambition. I noticed that the moment the elevator doors opened, that particular combination of expensive air freshener and the faint metallic edge that comes from too many laptops running too hot in an enclosed space. My brother was already seated at the head of the table, laughing at something the man across from him had said. That laugh. I'd heard it my whole life. The one that meant he was performing. I set my portfolio on the chair beside the door and started unpacking the quarterly binders. Nobody looked up. That was fine. I was used to it. My name is Lena Whitmore, 31 years old, youngest of 3, and for the last 4 years I had been the Director of Financial Compliance at Whitmore Capital Group, a title that, inside this family, meant roughly the same thing as the one who makes sure we don't get fined. My brother, the CEO, had introduced me at the last investor dinner as our in-house bookkeeper. He'd said it with a smile. Everyone had laughed. I had smiled too, because I'd learned a long time ago that correcting him in public cost more than it was worth. What nobody in that room knew, what nobody outside a very specific set of federal offices knew, was that before I joined the family business, I spent 6 years as a forensic financial analyst embedded with the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. My case designator was Meridian. I don't say that to sound impressive. I say it because it matters for what happened next. The man sitting across from my brother was named Preston Alford. 48, silver-haired, the kind of tan that comes from actual boats rather than spray. He represented a private equity firm called Harwick Meridian Partners, and he was there to pitch a co-investment deal worth approximately $200 million. My brother had been talking about this deal for 3 months. He called it transformational. He said it would position us for the next decade. He had already mentally spent the returns. I had spent the previous 2 weeks reading. I want to be specific about what that means, because people hear reading financial documents and they picture someone with glasses, sighing over spreadsheets. That's not what I do. What I do is listen to what documents are trying not to say. There's a rhythm to clean financials, a regularity. When something's been moved around, when money has been touched too many times between point A and point B, the rhythm changes. It's subtle. Most people would never catch it. But I spent 6 years at the FBI training myself to hear that specific silence. Harwick Meridian Partners' rhythm was wrong. I'd noticed it first in the Luxembourg subsidiary filings, a shell entity with a registered address that shared a postcode with 2 other companies, both of which had been flagged in a 2019 FinCN advisory I'd memorized during a training session years ago. It wasn't proof of anything. It was a whisper. I kept reading. The second thing I noticed was in the wire transfer documentation. There was a recurring transfer on the 14th of each quarter, always just under the $10,000 threshold that triggers automatic SAR filing, always to the same correspondent bank in Cyprus, always described in the memo line as consulting fees. 14 consecutive quarters. Not one memo specified who the consultant was. The third thing was the name of one of Harwick's silent partners, buried in an annex on page 211 of the offering memorandum, a holding company registered in the Cayman Islands, 3 entities removed from a name I recognized, a name that appeared in a case I had personally worked, a case that was still open. I had called my former supervisor the night before. She'd picked up on the second ring. I gave her the entity names, the transfer pattern, the Luxembourg postcode. There was a pause on her end that lasted long enough to tell me everything I needed to know. Don't sign anything, she said. I know, I said. We'll have someone there tomorrow. I almost asked who. But I'd learned not to ask questions I didn't need the answer to yet. So there I was, standing at the side of the room organizing binders that didn't need organizing, listening to my brother Charm, a man who I was fairly certain had been laundering money through 3 jurisdictions for the better part of a decade. Preston Alford had the kind of voice that made everything sound inevitable. He was talking about projected returns, about market timing, about a proprietary acquisition pipeline that would, frankly, between us, be closed to new partners within the week. My brother was nodding the way he nodded when he'd already decided and just wanted permission. I cleared my throat. My brother glanced at me the way you glance at someone who's just knocked something over, mildly annoyed, already looking away. Lena, can you give us the room? I didn't move. I'd like to stay, I said. There are some line items in the offering memo I'd like to ask Mr. Wright. Alfred about? Preston Alfred smiled at me. It was the kind of smile that men like him had perfected over decades. Warm on the surface, dismissive underneath. Of course. Please. My brother set his pen down. Not a good sign. This isn't the moment for compliance questions, Lena. We've been through the documents. I know you have, I said. I haven't finished. The silence that followed was the particular silence of a room full of people waiting for someone to be embarrassed. 2 junior associates from my brother's team, a lawyer from outside counsel, my brother's executive assistant who was taking minutes, all of them looking at me with varying degrees of pity. I opened to page 211 of the offering memorandum. Mr. Burse, Alfred, I'd like to ask about this entity. I turned the binder so he could see. Caledonian Partners III, registered in Grand Cayman. They appear as a silent partner in Harwick's Fund IV structure. Can you tell me who the beneficial owners are? Something moved behind his eyes. Barely. If I hadn't been trained to watch for it, I would have missed it. That's a standard privacy structure, he said. Very common in offshore vehicles. I'm sure your legal team can walk you through. I've been walked through it, I said. I'm asking about the beneficial owners specifically. My brother made a sound that was half laugh, half exhale. Lena, Mr. Alfred is here at our invitation. This isn't an interrogation. It's a $200 million commitment, I said. It should be. The room got quieter. Preston Alfred leaned back slightly. Just slightly. I caught it. I don't have that information available at this meeting. It would be in the restricted appendix, which is shared at closing. I'd like it before closing, I said. Lena, my brother's voice had an edge now. That's not how these deals work. No, I said, it's how this one should. I could feel everyone in that room deciding what kind of person I was. The problem child, the anxious one, the sister who couldn't read a room. I'd felt that assessment before. I'd learned to sit inside it without flinching. What happened next happened fast. The conference room door opened. A woman in a dark suit stepped in. 40. Precise. The kind of stillness that comes from years of training herself not to telegraph anything. Behind her was a man in a similar suit. Neither of them looked at my brother. Neither of them looked at Preston Alfred. They looked at me. The woman's name was Special Agent Dorinda Cross. She and I had worked 3 cases together during my time with the Bureau. She knew me as Meridian. She gave the smallest nod, the kind you'd miss if you didn't know to look for it. I nodded back. Preston Alfred had gone very still. I'm sorry to interrupt, Agent Cross said in a voice that made clear she wasn't sorry at all. We have a few questions for Mr. Alfred in connection with an ongoing federal investigation. She held up her credentials. If you'd come with us, sir. My brother stood up. What? I'm sorry. What is this? We're in the middle of Mr. Burt Whitmore, she said, and something in her tone made him stop. Your company is not the subject of our inquiry. We appreciate your cooperation. Preston Alfred did not look at me when he stood. He straightened his jacket, picked up his phone, and walked to the door with the careful composure of someone who had prepared for this moment and still wasn't ready for it. He paused at the threshold. Then he turned and looked at me. Not at my brother, not at the agents, at me. I held his gaze. He walked out. The room didn't know what to do with itself. The lawyer from outside counsel was already typing. The junior associates were looking at their laptops with great concentration. My brother's assistant had stopped taking minutes. My brother was staring at me, I closed the offering memorandum and set it back on the table. I'll have a summary memo on your desk by 4, I said. You'll want to read it before you talk to anyone. He didn't say anything. I picked up my portfolio and walked to the door. Lena. I turned. He looked, and I don't say this lightly because I'd spent 31 years watching this man project certainty like it was oxygen. He looked uncertain. It sat strangely on his face, like a word in a language he didn't speak. How long have you known? I thought about that for a moment, not about the answer. I knew the answer. I was thinking about how to say it without cruelty, because he was still my brother, and the point was never to humiliate him. Long enough, I said. I took the stairs back down to my office. 38 floors, I needed the time. My desk looked exactly as I'd left it, stacked with the kind of documents that nobody at the family dinner table had ever asked me about. Financial intelligence reports, correspondent banking advisories, the kind of reading material that makes other people's eyes glaze over in about 40 seconds, and that I find, genuinely, to be one of the most interesting puzzles that exists. My phone rang. It was my former supervisor. I answered on the first ring. He's in custody, she said. Alfred's been on our radar for 2 years. The Cyprus transfers were the thread we needed but couldn't pull. The Luxembourg connection cracked it open. We got authorization for the warrant this morning. The silent partner, I said, Caledonian Thur, ties directly to the Merson Group. You know that case. I did know that case. I'd spent 14 months on it before I left the bureau. A network of investment vehicles used to move money for a syndicate operating across Eastern Europe and the Gulf. It had been the case that made me understand how deep these structures could go and how ordinary the people who facilitated them usually looked. Good work, Meridian, she said. Thank you, I said. Give my best to the team. I hung up and sat down at my desk. Outside my window, the city went about its business the way cities do, without awareness, without pause, in the full and indifferent roar of itself. Taxis and scaffolding, and pigeons, and 8 million people who had no idea that a $200 million fraud had just been stopped in a conference room above their heads. I thought about my brother's face when the agents walked in, the exact second when something shifted in him. When he understood that his youngest sister, the one he'd introduced as the bookkeeper at the investor dinner, had just prevented the biggest mistake of his professional life. I'm not going to pretend I didn't feel something in that moment. I did, but it wasn't triumph. It wasn't the satisfaction I'd imagined, back when I was younger and used to rehearse these moments in my head. It was quieter than that. It was the feeling of having done the thing I was built to do, in the place where it needed to be done. Nothing more complicated than that. My brother appeared in my office doorway at 3:45. He knocked, which he'd never done before. I told him to come in. He sat across from my desk. He looked at the stacks of documents and the second monitor I'd added without asking, facilities and the framed commendation on the wall that he'd never asked about. He looked at all of it the way you look at a room you've walked past 100 times and just now entered for the first time. The memo, he said. I read it. Okay, I said. There's a paragraph in there about the 2019 FinCEN advisory. Yes. You memorized a 2019 FinCEN advisory. It was relevant, I said. He was quiet for a while. Outside my window, the afternoon light was doing what it does in autumn, going golden and sideways, making everything look slightly more significant than it is. I didn't know, he said finally, about the FBI, about any of it. I know you didn't. Why didn't you tell us? I thought about how to answer that. The honest answer was complicated, and it had nothing to do with classification protocols or NDAs. Though those existed, the honest answer was that I had spent most of my 20s building a version of myself that nobody in my family had ever asked to see, and eventually I'd stopped offering it. I didn't think you'd find it interesting, I said. He looked at me for a long moment. He's not a bad man, my brother. He's a man who was handed a company at 34 and decided that confidence was the only thing standing between him and catastrophe. I understood it. I'd just gotten tired of being made smaller to make his confidence larger. The deal, he said, if we'd signed, you would have been exposed to criminal liability, knowingly or not. The structure would have implicated Whitmore Capital and the money movement. The FinCEN records alone would have triggered a full audit. Best case, a significant fine and 3 years of regulatory oversight. Worst case, I paused. Worse, he nodded slowly. I'm sorry, he said, for what I said at the investor dinner. The bookkeeper thing. It's fine, I said. It's not, he said. It's not, he said. It wasn't fine. I looked at him across the desk, my older brother who I'd looked up to for years before I'd learned to stop measuring myself against his opinion. He meant it. I could tell. Thank you, I said. I appreciate that. He stood up, smoothed his jacket the way he did when he was resetting himself, started toward the door, then stopped. The Meridian thing, he said. Your case name. Was that a coincidence? Harwick Meridian Partners? No, I said. He looked at me. I noticed it in the first 10 minutes, I said. It's one of the reasons I kept reading. He almost laughed. Not the performance laugh, a different one. The one I remembered from when we were kids, before everything got complicated. Right, he said. Okay. He left. I turned back to my monitor. There was a new email from my former supervisor, a formal thank you from the bureau, routed through the usual channels. I read it once, filed it, and went back to work. There were 3 other investment proposals sitting in my queue, one from a real estate fund in Houston that had some irregular depreciation schedules I wanted to look at more closely. One from a tech company whose revenue recognition methodology I'd flagged 2 weeks ago and hadn't heard back on, and one, just received, from a private infrastructure fund with an unusually clean paper trail. I've learned that unusually clean can mean 2 things. Either everything is exactly as it appears, or someone very good worked very hard to make it look that way. I opened the document. I started at page 1. Outside, the city kept moving. The sun finished its arc and dropped below the skyline, and the building's lights came on the way they always did, floor by floor, window by window, without ceremony. Somewhere above me, my brother was on a phone call. Somewhere across town, Preston Alford was sitting in a room answering questions he didn't want to answer. And I was at my desk doing the thing I do, reading what the numbers are trying not to say, following the rhythm until it breaks. I've been doing this my whole career. Most people never knew. Now one more person does. That's enough. I've thought a lot about what Preston Alford's face looked like in that doorway. The half-second before he turned and walked out. There was something almost ordinary about it, the way composure finally runs out of room and just stops working. I didn't feel satisfaction exactly. I felt something quieter, something closer to recognition. Here's what I've come to understand. The things we build in private eventually speak in public, not loudly, not dramatically. They just show up when they're needed, and they're either there or they're not. I spent 6 years learning to read what numbers are trying not to say. Nobody asked me to. Nobody in my family knew I was doing it. I did it because it was the thing I was built for, and because I understood early that the world doesn't wait for you to be acknowledged before it asks something of you. My brother called me the bookkeeper. He meant it as a small word for a small role. But I've learned that the people who underestimate you are usually doing so because they've decided in advance what category you belong in. They're not reading you, they're reading their own assumptions. And assumptions, unlike financial documents, don't tell you when their rhythm is wrong. What stopped a $200 million fraud wasn't a confrontation. It wasn't a speech. It was page 211 of an offering memorandum and 14 consecutive quarterly transfers just under the reporting threshold. It was 6 years of training I'd never mentioned at a single family dinner. It was the discipline to keep reading when everyone around me had already decided the deal was done. That's the part I want people to sit with, not the moment when Agent Cross walked through the door. Not my brother's face when the pen dropped, the part that happened alone, at my desk 2 weeks earlier, when I could have looked at those documents and thought someone else will catch this, or this isn't my job, or maybe I'm wrong. The unglamorous part. The quiet, unglamorous, necessary part. I think about Lena a lot, which is strange to say because Lena is me, but I think about the version of her who almost didn't say anything in that boardroom, who almost gave the room what it wanted and stepped out when her brother asked. That version existed. She was real. She was standing right there in that conference room on the 42nd floor, calculating whether it was worth it. It was always worth it. Not because of what happened after. Not because of the apology, or the nod from Dorinda, or the formal thank you from the bureau, but because integrity isn't something you perform for an audience. It's something you do in the specific moment when the cost of doing it is real and the reward is nowhere in sight. That's the only version of it that counts. My brother said he was sorry. I believed him, and I think what he was sorry for wasn't just the investor dinner comment or the years of not asking. I think he was sorry for the assumption, the one that said capability looks a certain way, announces itself a certain way, belongs to a certain kind of person. That assumption cost him almost everything. What you build in the quiet, when nobody's watching, is the only thing that's actually yours. Everything else is borrowed,